Hey guys, welcome back to the tutorial series Introduction to Helm. Today in this video we are going to learn how to create Helm chart with dependencies. But before we start, a little bit about me. I am a JainishShah software development engineer. These are the links that you can use to follow me on GitHub, Twitter and LinkedIn. If you have any questions regarding the tutorial series, please feel free to reach out. I will try my best to give you answer. With that, let's get started. So today we are going to create a Helm chart of application which is written in Node, which requires a MongoDB database to store the data. Now we are going to do all this deployment with the Helm chart, which means we will have to create a Helm chart which deploys the MongoDB as well. Now to deploy MongoDB, what we are going to do, we are going to use a pre-created and MongoDB Helm chart which is maintained by a community, so you don't need to maintain it. So let's get started. Let's create our Helm chart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this application. As I mentioned, this is a Mongo DB application. This is an application which I wrote in Express.js, which uses Node.js and it uses MongoDB to persist the data. So basically we are going to do a CRUD, we call it CRUD, create, read, update and delete operation on the MongoDB using the Node.js client. If you want to just test the application, it is very simple. First you install MongoDB in your machine, then you run MongoDB, you create a test database, and then in the configuration you put your MongoDB database detail and start your Node application, which will show you a UI page where you can do all the operation for adding a new user or deleting or editing any data. So we already have a Docker file created. If you can see, the Docker file is very simple. It is just using Node version 6, copying the application and starting it on port 3000. So now let's get started with creating our Helm chart. So what I'm going to do, I have Minikube up and running, and throughout the tutorial I'm going to use Minikube. So let me do Minikube status, and you can see my Minikube is up and running. And right now, if I see, I have nothing running on this Minikube instance, right? And now I am in my directory for this tutorial series where I created one more folder, chart with dependency. Now let's go ahead and create a Helm chart. So for that we are going to use the Helm create command, and I'm going to name my Helm chart as express_crud just to easily remember, right? And now if you see, it has created a folder, and inside that folder, if you see, we have all the files created: chart.yaml, which is chart metadata, then a template directory which has all the template, and values.yaml of course, and this charts directory where it contains a dependent chart just in case if you have any dependency. So what we are going to do, we are going to use the artifact hub, which is a new public repository which keeps information about the all Helm chart. So what I'm doing, I'm just searching for a MongoDB Helm chart in here, and you can see there are a bunch of options. MongoDB Helm chart created or maintained by different users or organization. I am going to use one by Bitnami. Right, so as you can see here, if you want to use this Helm chart, you need to add this repo. Now in our case, what we are going to do, we are going to use this as a dependent chart, right? So what I will do, I will create a requirement YAML file. So let's go, I'm here in your chart parallel to your chart.yaml file, create a new file called requirements.yaml, and in that file you will be putting information about the MongoDB which you are using. So if you see, the MongoDB version here is 10.12.2, but previously I had tested the version 10.10.1, so I'm going to use that version. So we can select the version from here. And now what I will do, I will just copy the thing from here and paste. So basically what I'm doing, I'm creating a I'm specifying that I want one dependency, dependencies. One of them will be MongoDB, so I'm naming it as a MongoDB. The version of Helm chart, which I mentioned, which I provided, which we selected, which is 10.10.1. Right, and I'm just saying that, you know, get it from this repo. So if you see here, this is the repo where they have their Helm chart stored. So I'm adding that repo, and condition, basically, you know, if I want to have it enabled by default all the time, or specifically if it is enabled via values.yaml. Right, and we are going to keep it you know, conditional, because if you want to use external MongoDB, which most of the time people do, then you can you know, disable this deployment of dependent MongoDB Helm chart, and you can use the external one. Most of the time, you know, for statefulness of the data, you know, people uses the third party you know, managed service like RDSs, you know, to maintain the databases. In our case, we are just going to deploy that on the Kubernetes instance itself. So that part is done. Now I'm going to run a command, helm dependency update. Sorry, I need to go inside the directory, and I will run helm dependency update command. That will, if you see, it will fetch you know, from the Bitnami repository, it will fetch the Helm chart and it will store it under the charts directory. So let's see once. So you can see here it saved one chart, which is MongoDB, which it's getting from this repo specified. And now if you can see, it has created the chart directory. It got the chart tars, you know, tar file, and it's there. Now we need to use this. So we need to use this in our Helm chart, in our CRUD, you know, Express CRUD Helm chart. So next step is to use this MongoDB chart in our values.yaml. Right. So first thing we will need is obviously to enable, you know, the deployment, because we added the condition, right? That, you know, the deployment will be only based on the condition if that matches. So what I'm doing here now, I'm going to specify that I'm going to use MongoDB service. I want it enabled, set to true by default. You know, if you don't want to use it, you can disable it. Then if I look into values.yaml of MongoDB chart, just to see how, you know, you can pass the credential, you can see there is a auth section. So I will just add that auth section. I want to set you know, the new username and new root password. So I'm going to set a root password. Let's just use password 123 has in this case, just for testing purpose. I don't recommend doing that. Then if you see here, they have username, password and database. These are the things we need, which we need to set as well, because our CRUD application requires those details. I'm going to set the password you know, very similar to the one we set for root, but now we will say 234 instead of 123. And then the last, the database name, we are going to set it to taste, you know, as I have that created as a taste in here. Right, so at least now we have specified the values that we want to set when our Helm chart deploys MongoDB. Right, now obviously I need to change the repository, because we are not going to deploy Nginx, we are going to deploy the MongoDB, the CRUD service. So my Docker image, I'm replacing it with my Docker image, which is express mongo CRUD, and image, uh, basically the repository. Full policy we are setting to default if not present tag. So we are going to provide the tag in charts.yaml. You can see the application version is defined in here. So we are going to override the application version there, so that it matches the application version and takes it as a tag inside the application. So I'm going to set application version 101. You can set it to whatever the tag of Docker image that you are using to deploy your application. I'm going to keep the chart version for Express CRUD to 10010, because this is just a first version, right? And now let's go ahead and start editing the templates, because now we need to tell our deployment that, hey, use this application, and there are some information that it will need to talk to MongoDB, right? So I'm going to see how I used to pass those details to my application. So let's see the configuration, and you can see I used to set this environment variable with database URL. If that is provided, it will be entire string, or we can provide a database name, database user, database password, and database host and port. So let's do this. We will go with the separate approach. So first thing I will do, in my deployment YAML of my application, I'm going to pass some environment variable. So below the pod, I will set environment variable. The name of the first environment variable is database user, and the value, I will make it read the value from values.yaml file, right? So for that we will say dot values, then from MongoDB auth and username. So we want to make our admin user talk to MongoDB and connect to the database name taste, right? So we are passing those information from here, from our values.yaml, so that user can override this information at the runtime. Same way I'm setting up another variable, which is going to be a database name. Values, we are going to pass the database name value same way, right? I am making all the variables like this. Now for database host, because we are using the dependent Helm chart, we are deploying a Helm chart. So what you are going to do is you will use the release name, and followed by MongoDB, which is the name that you have set in your requirement.yaml, and this will be the host name for MongoDB service, right? So basically this is going to be the service name for MongoDB, and that's how your Express CRUD, your application, will be able to talk to the MongoDB. Yeah, I'm also setting the database port. By default it is 27017, right? And if you see it in MongoDB values.yaml, there should be a variable to override the port. Let me see where that is. Yeah, so you can see the service port. If you want to override the port, then you can do it in your MongoDB like this. So parallel to both, you will say service, and then here you will say port, and you can override to whatever value you want to override it to, but I'm going to keep it the default to the default, so not changing it. And last thing we need to set is the database password. Now for database password, as this Helm chart, the MongoDB Helm chart, it creates the service secret. So if you see in the template.yaml, it creates the secret for the with the MongoDB password. So we are going to read the MongoDB password from that secret. So for that, in our values.yaml, we will say value from secret and secret key reference. Now here the same way, the secret name will be the MongoDB name, because we are going to use that name for our release, for our installation. So basically it will be whatever name you use to install this Helm chart dash MongoDB. So let's say if you install your application as a MongoCrud, then it will be MongoCrud dash MongoDB, which will be the name of the secret. Now sorry, and that was the name, and now we will need to provide a key inside the secret to read the password. So it is going to be MongoDB password. So here we don't want to pass the root password, we want to pass the password for the user admin, which we are setting from the values.yaml, right? If you want to pass here, if you want to provide if you want to use the user root, then you will say here that it needs to read the password of the key MongoDB dash root dash password. But we are not going to do that. We are just using the password which we set for admin user. Secret, it will not like this. It feels like IntelliJ is telling that there is a typo, but let's not worry about that. Now for liveness probe, we are going to before that, if you see, our application runs on port 3000. So let's do one thing and change the port to 3000 instead of port 80, right? or if you want to keep it dynamic, right, then what you can do, if you see my application, I think there was a way to I haven't added the way to override the port, but if you want to override the port, then here you can make it read the environment variable port, and you can provide the port here when you are configuring your application. But let's keep it there that way only. So here we will say the port 3000 instead of port 80, which was the default port for Nginx. Now in my application, I have added the endpoint called health, basically to check the health check of the application, whether the application is up and running or not, whether it was able to communicate to database correctly or not, right? So we are going to use that endpoint to check the health of the running container, running pod, right? Port, we are going to tell it to use the HTTP port. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, one more thing we can do. Now sometimes it can happen that your application basically it takes little more time. MongoDB application takes little more time to get started. Now if you don't add some wait time in your application, it will immediately it will immediately fail, saying not able to connect to MongoDB or to database, and then it will restart the container. Now in this if you want to avoid this kind of scenario, what you can do, you can add an init container, right? And you can tell that init container to wait for database. So let's say we are naming that container that way only. You can provide which image you want to run. Usually we get value for this image this kind of images from values.yaml. Usually we want to run Alpine Docker image, which is simple. So I will say, read the init container image value right, from values.yaml. Now you can see in our values.yaml we don't have the init container image value specified, right? So we are going to basically provide that value. Okay, and I'm going to use Alpine image for this Alpine version 3.x, but you can use whatever image you would like to use, right? So now we need to tell this init container what to do. Right now what I want to do is I want to tell this init container that, hey, run a command on the start, and that command will be to basically check whether the MongoDB service, MongoDB application is up and running or not, right? So what I'm doing, I'm just telling container that, hey, run this script. I'm just copying this script because I had it in one of my other Helm chart, and I will explain what I'm doing in here. Just basically what I'm doing is I'm running an nc command. Basically it is to see whether the service network connection is established to this host name, which is the MongoDB service name, this port. If it is established, then it will print that MongoDB is okay, and it will exit the init container and it will start running our application container. But if the MongoDB is not up yet, if my Alpine wait for DB container cannot establish a proper connection to MongoDB, it will sleep for 2 seconds and it will retry it again, right? So that's how we are making sure that before it starts our application container, it is making sure that database is up and running. So you can do the same thing even if you are using external database, right? You can run the similar command for Postgres or MySQL or any database that you are using. So that is pretty much it. Now we will change because we have modified the port, we will change the service as well in service. So let's see what is our service port set to. Service port is set to 80. Right now let's do one thing in here. I want to basically make specify the internal port as well, an internal port which is our container port, because we need to tell the application, the service, to talk to that port, right? So for that we are going to change the service.yaml and here this port, because this will be the internal port. This is going to be the external port, so it should be okay. Sometimes you want to expose the service to different port, right? So here, and I'm just changing it to so instead of port I'm saying external port, right? And we will use that value to specify the external port for service. So here we are going to say that expose my service on load balancer on the service on port 80, but it should communicate to port HTTP, which is port 300 in our case. Right now let me change this and let me have it read the value dynamically from the values.yaml. So we'll say read it from service and take the value of internal port, which we set to 3000. Right now by default we tell it to use cluster IP. If you want to, let's say if you are deploying your application on a managed service which is hosted on one of the cloud provider, be it GKE or EKS or Azure AKS, then you want to set this to load balancer if you want to expose your application via load balancer to the internet. If not, then the other option is use node port if you want to expose the application on specific port of all the Kubernetes nodes, or cluster IP which is a private, which will be accessible only within the cluster. Right, so we are pretty much done here. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to lint the chart to see whether the linting looks good, and you can see object does not, there is some metadata mismatch, so I'm going to change few things in here and there. So chart.yml express crud, let me see what it did not like. So the first error is in deployment.yml, object name does not confirm the Kubernetes naming requirement, test release invalid metadata name. Oh, so looks like we cannot use underscore in the application name. So what I'm going to do, instead of underscore, I'm going to change it to dash. Right, now if I lint my chart again, you can see it did like it. It's saying icon is recommended. So for example, if you are going to publish your Helm chart in any of the public repository, then if we would like to provide an icon like this, but in our case it's okay, it's just a warning and we are going to ignore it. Right, now let's do this. Let's install our Helm chart. We are just going to say it express crud, and we will provide because our chart is in current directory, so I'm just going to say dot slash, and you can see okay, something still did not like. I think I made the same mistake. Instead of underscore, I am going to use dash, and you can see it did like it and it did install my application. Now if I do kubectl get pod to see whether my application is installed or not, and you can see it is deploying the mongodb container, also it is deploying my application container. Now let's see if the it's running mongodb. You can see the mongodb container looks up, it's just maybe waiting for health check. Okay, and you can see the container is healthy, and plus our application is healthy as well. So if I see log of our application, basically liveness probe is passing, and it is basically hitting the health endpoint slash health. It looks healthy. Now let me run the Helm status again, if to basically see how to access this application, and it gave me the command. So I'm just going to run this commands as suggested, to get the pod name, to get the container name, and basically to use the port forwarding to access the application. Now if I go to this port 8080, I will be able to access my application, and you can see here I'm seeing the user page. Let me add some user in here. I'm going to turn 30, and you can see I was able to add the data. I'm able to edit the data as well. Let me remove my middle initial, and you can see it has removed my middle initial and saved the application. I can delete the data from here as well, right? And so this is how you create a Helm chart with a dependency. It's super easy, but obviously you will need to have a familiarity with the application that you are trying to deploy, and the way it will communicate with the database, so that you can add those information in your deployment YAML so that your application can talk to the database. So I hope you will learn something new in this video. If you have any question, feel free to add your questions in the comment. I will try my best to answer. uh, Thank you again for watching the video. Stay tuned for next video, where we are going to learn little more about the Helm chart. And till then, bye bye.